This article comes from pushback.us. Africa has the most resources. So, why is it still poor? Well, I have a few answers to that. One of those answers is poor leadership. Your leaders do not have a backbone. They will not stand up to the Asians who are currently in Africa. They will not stand up to the Europeans. They won't stand up to the Americans and deal with them if they want the resources on a business level. They're pretty much giving away these resources for pennies on the dollar. The second reason is tribalism. Now, when we think about tribalism, ladies and gentlemen, most Americans, most Europeans, most Australians think of Native American Indians and their tribes. They think about the indigenous people in Australia and the passing down of culture and language and tradition and customs. But in a place like Africa that is 99% black, tribalism does more than that. It is about being able to distinguish oneself from another, similar to the way that we distinguish each other in Western countries via race. But in Africa, because you're all black, you can't do that. You can't distinguish by race, you have to distinguish by tribes. And one of the common ways of doing this is tribal markings. This is why we see people with certain tribal markings on their face and bodies. It's a way of saying that I am Ohu or Adudu, or I am Umbegwe tribe or Ohu tribe. There are like 5,000 tribes in Africa, I think. So I'm not going to go through all of them. It would take all day. But long story short, these tribes, for the most part, do not work together. And the reason they don't do this is because they don't see themselves as a monolith. They see themselves as individual sects. And unless one tribe has an agreement or some sort of arrangement or an alliance with another, they're not going to come to each other's aid when things go down. And this is something that has been passed on for centuries, longer than that, in fact. This has been passed on for thousands of years. These tribes have only worked with each other when they absolutely needed to. They don't help each other out. And tribalism is also one of the reasons why we, the descendants, our ancestors, were sold into slavery. One tribe had a beef with another, and they sold our ancestors out. This is why we ditched tribalism centuries ago, because it didn't do us any good. And the last reason is, I believe Africans just don't have it in them. They don't have it in them. And the reason I say this is because I see especially, a lot of black immigrants who come from the continent. And despite the fact that they've got all these resources, and I will actually try and show a full picture of this near the end of the video, so please stick around. But despite the fact that they've got the resources, despite the fact that they have all the land that you could ever want and need, they just don't have it in them. This is why they move to places like America, the land of Ados. This is why they moved to Europe. They just don't have it in them. And we know that Africa was colonized a few times. Certain parts had it worse than the others, but they've had the luxury of having more freedom than any other group on this earth, and yet they have done nothing with it. Africa is blessed with troves of diamonds, sugar, coffee, salt, gold, iron, oil, cobalt, used in smartphones, and much more. So why is Africa the poorest continent? The answer goes back hundreds of years, but it's not just history. The underdevelopment of Africa is still happening today. For hundreds of years, Europeans have exploited Africa, primarily through slavery. According to Giovanni Vimercati, Slavery was the very basis of Western development and global supremacy. So basically, this guy Giovanni is admitting that slavery, he's not saying American chattel slavery, but I'm just going to say it for him. American chattel slavery kicked off the global economy. After the end of slavery, however, European powers needed a way to get rich. They got together in Berlin, Germany in 1885 and split up the continent amongst themselves. Thus, the countries that we know of today in Africa were largely created by Europe. These colonizers crippled local industries so locals couldn't gain power. And this is where I come back to the whole tribalistic aspect. Back then and even now, the African people greatly outnumber any European, any Asian, any American colonizers. But the reason they don't stick up is because they don't see themselves as a monolith, the way that African Americans, for the most part, see black people. And this is how they got taken over. Though Africa is now, quote, independent, European American, and more recently Asian corporations invest, quote, in Africa by taking all their resources. They still force African governments to rely on their infrastructure and foreign aid or face punishment. This continues today, both legally and illegally. A recent study has shown that over 15 billion in gold alone is stolen every year from the continent. Foreign companies, governments, and citizens, in some cases, Americans like us, benefit from Africa's natural resources. I don't think so. And I say this with a grain of salt. The reason I say I don't think we benefit from this is there's nothing in my home, and I'm sure in most of y'all's homes, that is made in Africa. And I want you to take a moment and think about this. What do you own? What do you use regularly? What do you have that comes from Africa? Is the shirt on your back from Africa? No, mine says made in Thailand. The vehicle you drive, what is there an African American car? I'm sorry, not African American, an African car company that you can think of? I don't think so. I can think of a Japanese one, a German one, an American one. I got a Ford. That's about as American as you can get. What comes out of Africa that you use on a daily basis? This is where I come back to another point I was mentioning. Africa has, I'm sorry, I haven't actually mentioned this yet, but Africa was not completely colonized. Only certain parts were. And unfortunately, Africa has had all this time to develop, yet they refuse to. And why, I believe? They just don't have it in them. They just don't. But reading on, the people of the continent suffer. What will it take for Africa to be truly independent? One of those things would be to eliminate tribalism. That is the one thing that has hindered you for centuries. The second thing is get rid of your corrupt leaders. That's another thing you could do. And the third thing is stop wanting to leave. You have all the resources. Tell your citizens they need to stay, invest, and build up your continent. But that's all I've got for y'all today. Have a good day, night, morning, evening, wherever you're at in this world. Peace and love always. Stay safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.